and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, too. Guess what? The last time I remember actually interacting with you was last year, 2018.
That's right, and good to be back.
And you look terrific, especially with this new attire, my friend. You look very diplomatic. You just look like somebody's special envoy to Washington.
That's correct. I just came from North Korea. A warm welcome to you all, our Facebook followers and watching us all over the world. Happy New Year to you all. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka and ask questions, pertinent questions about what's going on the continent. Shaka, let's begin here at home. There's a lot happening here in terms of the government shutdown. As federal employees, we are part and parcel of those who have been impacted by the shutdown. Could you maybe start by explaining us what the shutdown means and what kind of implications are going to result, are happening as a result of this shutdown?
First of all, the government shutdown means really for all practical purposes, the government of the United States of America, the federal government that is, it is out of business. It has no budget. There are no salaries. There are no salaries, for example, to be paid to those who work or those who are not working. And for the most part, in fact, a lot of people are not working, with the exception of those who are categorized as essential services. Those who deal with essential services like broadcasting, like we are doing, and some other very sensitive types of support services, they are working. But even where you work and they call it furlough, there is no guarantee, for example, that at the end of the day, you will be paid.
So you and I are technically working for free?
Well, we are basically working in the sense that we are being patriotic.
Yeah, interesting. When you talk about, earlier you talked about the budget, there's no budget, there's no money for, when you put it in the African context, a lot of people don't understand what it means to have another arm of government sort of like doing the checks and balances. Here, when it comes to Congress, Congress controls the national purse. But in the African context, you have a lot of governments where the presidents, not the Congress or the parliament, control the national purse. Maybe put that in context for us.
Actually, ideally, even with lots of governments which are democratically challenged on the African continent, the legislature is supposed to be in the control of the purse. But the strong man, for the most part, who happens to be a president, happens to be commander-in-chief of the armed forces and therefore controls, in fact, the institutions of violence, so to speak, also controls the treasury. But you know, even here there are some problems because let's face it, there are some things that I was expecting, for example, to receive from Europe, but I was being told that due to the government shutdown, probably because of certain services, dealing with customs and what have you, they have actually delayed to be delivered. So there are certain services that are not working as they otherwise ought to be working. I mean, you know as well as I do that you look around and there are a lot of people that you normally see, but you actually don't see them. So there must be something affecting the kind of services that normally they provide.
So is it more of a political thing or it's how government functions here in America?
It is very political because, let's face it, in this particular case, it's really about the almighty war. The President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, insists that he has to get his way, he has to get the wall, which he wants to actually be built at the border between the United States and Mexico for practical purposes, because apparently a lot of people who are characterized as illegal aliens or illegal immigrants tend to come to the United States via that route. There are some people who actually say this marks probably of racism and what have you, even though obviously the White House denies that. that if in fact you want to build a wall, you stop people from coming to America, then what about also building perhaps another wall separating the United States and Canada? Why Mexico? Is it because the people from that part of or that area happen to be brown? Whereas for a lot of people, when they think about Canada, they associate it with the color white, even though in fairness to Canada, really, in fairness to the White House, when you look at Canada, it's not simply white. It's in fact, you know, all the colors that you can think about, because it's a very democratic country, and it probably has one of the best immigration policies that in terms of really offering them as a country that welcomes those who are in need of new sanctuaries.
When you talk about the wall, what comes in mind is the Berlin Wall during the Cold War. And I remember seeing images of that Berlin Wall being destroyed. Is this something that maybe long after President Trump is gone, let's say he succeeds in coercing the Democrats to give him the money, is this something that maybe in future we can see being destroyed? Because a lot of people have been destroying these walls. They no longer need boundaries really to stop people from doing the cross-border trade and that sort of view because of globalization.
I think that it is very, very unfortunate, especially when you're talking about a country that has actually been historically known for providing sanctuary to a lot of needy people, especially people who come to this country running away from political persecution, you know, that kind of stuff. And of course, there are also others who come here who are characterized as economic refugees, who feel that there are some greener pastures here in North America, and that when they come here, they get an opportunity to build themselves up. And when you think about it, that is true. But it is also equally true that, in fact, all studies indicate that those immigrants that we are talking about, when they come here, they in fact add value. They contribute a lot. They contribute enormously, to such an extent that the United States, when you look at it actually, it is a country that is a reflection of the rest of the world. So we're talking about, for example, when you are in the United States, you are actually living in a country that is a reflection of what you would characterize as the United Nations plenary session. Everybody is here, whether they are called tribes, whether they are called ethnic communities, whether they are called nationalities, whether they are called the colors of, you know, that they are white, they are black, they are yellow, there are others who are somewhere in between and whatever. They are all here. And it is a country that for many, many years used to be looked up to as an example of what should really happen in this world. And you have a lot of statues, for example, in this country, which celebrate that. You're talking about essentially, you know, when you think about who is in America really, when you think about who are they are us. When you talk about the Statue of Liberty in New York, that incredibly gorgeous woman who basically has her arms welcoming those people who are running away from religious persecution, from political persecution, dictatorships, and all that kind of stuff. It is in New York. And so really, there are a lot of people who sometimes think that that's not a particularly good policy for the United States.
That's a perfect segue to our next segment. You talked about the United Nations, how the U.S. is a microcosm of the whole world. Everybody is welcome here. But let's cross over to Congo. Let's go to Avati David Ambrose. Why doesn't the United Nations intervene to find the election results in Congo? Interesting, considering that we've had an election in Congo. They held an election on December 30th. We don't know the outcome of those elections.
You know, it would be very interesting, in fact, if the United Nations, as it is and as it were, had the moral authority to step in and do exactly the right thing, because the United Nations, unfortunately, is historically associated with having played a role back in 1960, at the time when the Congo got independence, regained its political independence from the Belgian Congo. It was called Congo, and its first prime minister was Patrice Emery Lumumba. Up to today, yes, we read about how the man was toppled, how the man was killed, assassinated, and what have you. There is not a very clear picture of what, in fact, was the role played by the United Nations. But whatever kind of information that you access, it doesn't look good for the United Nations image, and therefore it may probably not be the right institution to be thinking about going in the Congo and actually calling calling it like it is. I think that we should in fact urge and appeal to the Congolese authorities or DRC authorities to do the right thing. As a matter of fact, there is a very respected institution called the Catholic Church, and the bishops, in fact, in the Congo have already gone on record saying that they knew who is exactly the winner of the last election, and that winner is not, by the way, a man who is supposed to be representing the government led by Joseph Kabila. You are talking about a man called Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari, that he didn't quite do well. That is according to some sources that I have actually heard from.
But Shaka, I beg to differ on that. The Catholic Church in Congo, as much as it's very, very popular in Congo, they are not the authority in terms of announcing or annulling the election. There is a body, the Electoral Commission, that is authorized by law to be the person or to be the body that announces those elections.
You're right. The Catholic Church is obviously not made up of authorities, but the Catholic Church happens, first of all, it happens to be very, very influential in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It also happened to be very highly respected by basically the ordinary Congolese. It also happens to be very highly disciplined. It also happens to be very resourceful. And it was also involved in observing and monitoring the election. So it has some information, which of course it has access through some of its agents who were part of the observer group. But again, you are right. It does not have the constitutional right, for example, of really calling the election. That is the province of the Electoral Commission of the Congo, which, by the way, according to a lot of sources, is not necessarily an independent branch of government, because a lot of people say it is, in fact, it is an electoral commission that is probably subordinate to the executive. And the executive, of course, is led by President Joseph Kabila, but there is no evidence as far as I'm concerned.
But how is that different from any other country in Africa that has held elections in the last couple of years or last month?
Oh, there are so many different countries in Africa that
where the executive has no control.
Oh, yes, there is. There's no question about it. For example, South Africa. South Africa does have institutions that are independent and actually do conduct their roles. If you think about the beacon of democracy or for Africa, or the African beacon of democracy for hope, it is South Africa. And it's not only South Africa. You go to Ghana, for example. They have done the right thing. You go to Senegal. You go to Benin. You actually even go to the most populous nation in Africa, Nigeria. They did it in 2015 under Professor Atahiri Jaga.
Okay, interesting. How would you respond to a commenter from Uma Bukenya? Can President Kabila of Congo survive this election violence, and what his future in Congo amid mass protest is?
First of all, I think the comment observation implies, frankly, that there is violence. We don't, frankly, see any violence so far. Have you seen any? So we don't really know that that is going to be the case because we don't even know the results. And we don't know, therefore, if in fact finally the results are announced, how the population is going to react. But some of the evidence I have so far, which I have not been able to verify, especially given the fact that it is a very sensitive issue, and given that I have not had the opportunity, for example, to talk with some of the principals that are named and involved, but my impeccable sources in this town tell me that a top State Department diplomat actually called President Joseph Kabila via telephone. But that President Kabila, according to these sources, declined to take the call. And that if President Kabila had picked the call, he was going to be told, for example, that there is incontrovertible evidence suggesting that that election was actually won by a man called Martin Fayulu, who happens to be a candidate for the coalition of the opposition party, or the opposition groups and all that kind of stuff. And that, in fact, the government authorities who are in charge of that election should probably immediately release the elections based on the results which reflect the will of the people.
But Shaka, again, that's based on speculation. As far as we are concerned, the official results are not out. So any official calling from the United States, or even any other place for that matter, is in no authority really to be calling the election in Congo.
You have a point, except that there is a problem here. Mind you, these elections have not been delayed, for example, by hours, by one day, by some days, by weeks, by months. These are elections, Ndugu, which were supposed to be held in 2016. 2016, how many times do you, frankly, keep shifting the goalposts?
I will give you that. Let's go to another comment. Nambilir Wamuna Amina. Elections in Africa lost meaning. Incumbents end up rigging due to corrupt electoral agencies. Your thoughts?
Well, again, that is very interesting because when you think about it, the vast majority, in fact, of the elections that have actually been conducted on the African continent, some very critical, knowledgeable observers characterize them as elections. There are very, very few elections which have been conducted in so many countries on the continent in which you have an incumbent competing and an incumbent, in fact, losing that election. Why? Because there is a saying that in most African countries, and most of them are democratically challenged, there is no difference really between the ruling party and the state, or the government as it were. The two are fused. And so you have an incumbent who has incredible advantages. It is imagining really having a football match between two teams, and one of the teams is led by a captain who actually has the power to choose the ball that has to be used for playing the game, to choose who is going to be the referee, the linesmen, or lineswomen, or linespersons, and also, to a certain degree, perhaps, to choose who are in fact going to be the spectators. And having said that, also to choose, by the way, the people that are in fact going to count the votes. And so it is said that in most African countries where elections have been held and where an incumbent is actually participating, what happens normally is that the results do not necessarily reflect the will of the people, but rather the will of the individuals who actually are counting the vote, and to a certain degree sometimes the will of the individual who has the power to announce the results.
You are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you live every Tuesday here at the Voice of America. Today we are talking about the elections in Congo. Right now, I think maybe let's focus our attention to Gabon.
But before we go to Gabon, if you don't mind, I just wanted to say that there are really two possibilities here in the Congo. Either the election is going to be won by Fayulu, a man who comes from Bandundu, and a man who is supported, by the way, by, among others, Jean-Pierre Bemba and Moise Katumbi. And or the election is going to be won by Felix Tshisekedi, a Muruba man who comes from, you know, what used to be Katanga, where you have the diamond epicenter, the world's diamond epicenter. We're talking about Mujimai and Kananga. You know, these are places where you can just be walking, and when it rains, you can just see diamond in your neighborhood, you know, that kind of stuff. This man is, by the way, when you look at him, Felix Tshisekedi, who obviously had a father who happened to be almost like in permanent opposition, a man that at least never had the credit of winning an election, even though there are times when he looks like he is in a position where he could have ended up being president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Felix Tshisekedi, when you look at what he's talking about and what he's saying about not wanting to be politically vindictive or to carry out like, to become like a man who is political witch hunting and stuff like that, he sounds like a man who, others have suggested, he may in fact have cut a deal with President Joseph Kabila, and that he could in fact be the kind of guy who could protect the interests of President Joseph Kabila and what have you. And therefore there are people who say he is the man that President Joseph Kabila probably could cut a deal so that they could have a sort of transitional government together. After all, President Kabila controls the institutions, including those institutions of violence.
But wait a minute, Shaka. You seem to be very confident that the opposition is going to win. How about the guy, the ruling coalition that Shadari, Ramadan Shadari is representing?
I do not see it.
From what I've seen, he looked like he was doing very, very well in the campaigns leading to the election.
It is not up to me really to feel or to think. What I am saying is a reflection of the sources that I have interacted with, the kind of information that they have. There is no question that it doesn't look good for Shadari. It doesn't look good because you have to talk about a country having a government that is running on a specific record. There are some good things that the Kabila government has done and what have you, but a lot of people say, to be very honest with you, that they feel like they want change.
Shaka, a lot of people are asking us about the coup in Gabon. Can you maybe explicitly talk about that very briefly?
The coup probably that never was, because the last time I checked, the government of Ali Bongo still remains in place. Some of the leaders of the coup, very young junior officers and stuff like that, were arrested. And in fact, I think I saw that two of them may in fact have actually been killed.
That's correct.
Yeah. So there is no coup. The coup did not succeed, but there was an attempt.
So does that mean that from what we've been reading, political analysts talking about how President Ali Bongo Ondimba has a grip on power, does that sort of like reinforce what these political analysts are saying?
It is not simply President Ali Bongo, but it probably is really the family of the Bongos have actually been in power for at least 5 decades. 5 decades. But they have to address the fundamental root causes of what causes, military coups. So why people, for example, when they go to the vote, they decide that they are voting for change. You have an incredibly rich country, again, where people are incredibly very poor in terms of service delivery and what have you. Mind you, the president himself right now as we talk is in fact undergoing medical treatment and recovering in another African country, which is named Morocco. Why wouldn't he, for example, be recovering in his own country? This is a man who at one time was Minister of Defense, and he was honestly reputed for having built an incredible and enviable medical care system for the soldiers and stuff like that. I interviewed him I think, not a long time ago. I mean, it was last year. And he's a remarkably articulate individual. By the way, he's a graduate of the University of Paris, the Sorbonne. He did law. He also did some courses in English at my alma mater, UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. He's a very nice guy. He obviously looks like he knows exactly what he's doing. But to be very honest with you, he needs to, first of all, make sure that the average Gabonese become the primary stakeholder in the economy of the Republic of Gabon. And if he doesn't really take care of some of those problems, this will not be the last time that soldiers will have tried to take him out.
I've been to Gabon a couple of times, and I've seen some of the reforms that he is trying to usher in, but it doesn't look like a lot of people are satisfied with what he has been doing. What are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow, we are basically looking at the challenges of political transitions, really. And so we'll be, in fact, even talking a little bit more about what is happening or not happening in Gabon, why the soldiers decided to use that mode of trying to bring about change. We'll be looking also at whether or not we have the election results from Kinshasa. We'll be looking at the Sudan, where the ordinary people have decided to at least express their feelings, their thinking about the services of the man that is at the political harem in Khartoum. Is it Field Marshal Omar al-Bashir? So we'll be talking about that, and we'll be also talking about other countries that are going to be conducting elections. You're talking about Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria. Can it in fact repeat what happened in 2015? Because if it does, then that will be great, because 1 out of every 4 Africans, some studies show, may in fact be a Nigerian. So if Nigeria can in fact get it, Nigeria can become democratic. Surely, a lot of African countries can also do it. In fact, when you look at the democratization process on the African continent so far, it is not an accident that at least so far, the West African region is, when you compared to Southern region, to Central region, to North Africa region and what have you, is doing relatively much, much better.
Well, it looks like we've run out of time. That's all we have for you today. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday. We look forward to having you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And a happy new year to you all.